Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 8th episode of the ABT Time podcast. And this is my little voice intro briefly before we jump into the actual podcast itself, because you'll see it's fairly chaotic, so it needs this intro. What this episode is simply 90 minutes of us talking about the Narrative Blitz event that we just finished running an hour and a half ago. So the Narrative Blitz was such a hit back in mid-April when we ran it the first time. We had over 1,500 people sign up for it, and 80% of the people were still there 2 hours later, that we decided to run it again here on June 9th. And once it was over with, I invited all the speakers, the ones that could make it, to join me for discussion. So 6 of them were able to make it. You'll hear from them as soon as we get going. Those people are Shirley Malcom, Rick Nelson, Julie Claussen, Liz Foote, Marlis Douglas, and Mike Backus. And what we're going to do is, this one's 90 minutes long. We had so much to say. We go through actually, we only made it through the first 2 out of the 4 blocks. So we go through about 10 people's talks and just all of us offer up our thoughts on what each talk was about. It's really fun, a lot of energy. And there's the ominous music right now, which means it's almost time for the happy music. Here we go. Here we are. And everybody join in. There is my co-host, Jen. Welcome, everybody, to whatever number episode this is of the ABT Time podcast. We're going to have a whole big crowd of people here. Everybody's in a good mood because we just ran the Narrative Blitz for the second time, and I think it was better the second time around. Jen, what do you think?
Well, I wasn't there the first time, Randy, so I can't make that comparison. But look, I have to say, I was pretty impressed, because when you said, I saw you wrote somewhere that you should view it like a movie, it's that compelling. And part of me went, yeah, right, Randy, as if. I'm planning on writing a few emails at the same time, might do a bit of a strength set out the back while I listen. And bloody hell, you were right. I sat, even at 4 o'clock in the morning, deeply engaged, and I took a heap of notes, and I feel like I've learned a ton. So thanks all.
That's wonderful. And I had the same experience, which was, I've been toying about whether or not we're going to run this for Australia, New Zealand, as we had talked about. And as soon as it got going, I thought, yeah, we got to definitely do it. It really is. It was so good, so much fun. What we're going to do on this episode is we've invited everybody and anybody to join in. Lots of guests, some people that were just observers were invited to join as well. But we first have to begin. We're going to go chronologically with all the different presentations, and we're going to give our intensely critical assessment of each one. So we have to begin with our special guest, Dr. Shirley Malcom, who gives the very first presentation. So Shirley, have you seen the whole Blitz? I know you were.
No, I haven't seen the whole Blitz. You keep putting it at a time I can't make
it. All right. Well, give us some words of enlightenment, regardless, about Shirley's Law, because we talked about it in several of the conversations later. If you don't tell your own story, somebody else is going to tell it for you, and you probably aren't going to like what they have to say. Have you seen the examples of that lately?
Oh, yes. And I thank you for the one that you sent me, which basically says that Nero was framed.
Oh, yeah, that's in the New Yorker this week. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, the thing is that if he wasn't basically controlling his press, other people basically put it out there, and it sounded pretty bad. I mean, it made him into a person I wouldn't want to know.
Yeah. The problem is timeless. If you don't tell your own story,
the problem is timeless, and I keep seeing examples of it all over the place.
Is it still going on there in Georgia politics? Oh yeah.
I mean, the things in the political sphere, absolutely, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Anybody want to jump in with thoughts about Shirley's talk and her basic point of, if you don't tell your own story, somebody else is going to tell it for you, and you probably won't like how they tell it. Anybody? Mike Backus, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's true wisdom, because if you don't control your narrative, somebody will pick it up and control it for you.
Yeah, it's age old. Hello, Rochelle. Welcome to join the little group here.
Hi.
Did you have a specific question for us? I mean, we're just going to be rambling along here.
I was so taken by the Narrative Blitz. So I've not ever heard of ABT. I've been through tons of leadership training, and you name it, I've probably taken it through my federal career, and had not heard of ABT. And so I was invited to this, and just like like, wow, mind blown in lots of different ways. And so when you put it out there that we could join in the podcast, I thought, well, it's an opportunity for me to listen more, learn more, maybe ask a couple more questions, and just continue to soak some of this up. So thanks for having me. It's a blast.
You betcha. You're with the Forest Service or where?
I am.
Yeah,
Yep.
great. Yeah, we have big ambitious plans with you guys. You know, we're in deep with National Park Service, and FAA is jumping in a big way. And then several of our people are friends of ours. Jeff Morissette just went to work. He was with USGS, and he's kind of he did the story circles training a few years ago. Great guy. And I think as soon as he got there at Forest Service, he started talking it up with people. So yeah, the sky's the limit. I think we'll do our first round with you in August, I believe. Maybe you can be a part of that one. It'll be really great.
I'd love that.
Yeah, of course, is wonderful. Who wants to say anything about Shirley's wonderful talk? Liz, give us some thoughts on Shirley.
Oh, I love Shirley's Law. In fact, I have constantly referred to it before we had a name for it, because I work in conservation, and a lot of times there's this situation where there's an opportunity for people to come to the table and be part of the process. And we'd say, hey, if you're not participating, you're not going to have a voice in the process, in the outcome, and in general, telling your story. If you don't do it right, someone else will do it for you. It's a reality in any discipline, but especially conservation. I'm sure, Rick, you would agree with that.
I was just going to cue Rick. Rick, tell us about North Dakota.
Well, I've got the real life example of that in spades, I guess, because every time I've heard Shirley's Law, the same thing resonates with me. First of all, it's right on. Second of all, with what went on in North Dakota, we had this initiated measure for conservation that just got creamed. And Randy and I have talked about this a lot, and there's so many facets to this that come out that ABT would have been useful, and it wasn't used. But again, one of them is the big tenet of tell your own story, or somebody else will tell it and you won't like the outcome. That's exactly what happened to us in North Dakota. The conservation community didn't tell their own story, and the oil company told it for us, and we didn't like it, and we got beat 80-20 at the polls. So that resonates with me. The other interesting thing to me about that, whenever I say that to somebody, whenever I say Shirley's Law is this to people, I mean, it just stops them cold. They just get this wide-eyed doe in the headlights look, and it's like, well, crap. Yeah, I never thought about that before. But it's absolutely so dynamic and so true. And I just keep going back to that stuff that happened in North Dakota, and somebody else told our story.
And that was what happened. And they had those TV commercials that said, here's what the conservationists are going to do with your tax dollars, all of which was wrong, but they told the story for them. And once it's told, it's stuck. And a lot like what happened with Hillary Clinton, you know, her opponents told her story and she didn't get out there and fight back. And as a result, if you don't have an alternate story to choose from, then that's going to be the one.
The folks that were opposed to the measure here lied through their teeth constantly. And I've told Randy a number of times, as badly as we did the communication stuff here on the measure, they didn't even have to lie. They just they could have just told the story and not lied, and we still would have gotten our rear ends kicked.
Isn't that the truth?
But Rick, you know, the thing is, it sounds so simplistic. I mean, it's so simple.
It is.
It's so obvious.
It is.
But you realize that, unfortunately, you realize how obvious it is when people mess it up.
Yeah. I think one thing that kind of came together today with several of the talks was this idea that you get these inner circles that get their story all straight, and they think that they're all ready to go out to the public, and then they go out to the public and they just don't have it well put together. And the next thing you know, it gets disassembled, and then the public makes their own mess out of it. And the number of times that people, well, we thought we had it all straight before we went out there and started talking. God, that happens over and over again. It's really sad. Jen, you got any examples? I was just
going to say, I think that's exactly the point, Randy, because we all get so caught up in our own echo chambers and our own inner circles that we think things are completely self-evident. and we become self-absorbed, it's like, well, it must be absolutely obvious who I am and what I stand for, or who we are and what we stand for. And we don't bother to step out, or we don't bother to listen to the fool. And we certainly don't bother to think enough about the outer circle to realize it's not self-evident at all. You're just thinking about yourself if you think everyone realizes what matters to you. And unless you can communicate it clearly, absolutely other people will tell the story. And the point is, they'll tell the story that suits their narrative. And if they happen to be good at narrative, then you are screwed.
And that's,
I mean, how many times have we heard people say, especially in our community, well, the data speak for themselves? No, they don't.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I got to run, but I did want to come in and
Okay.
basically say hi to everyone.
Well, let me make one quick introduction of Jen Martin. She's my wonderful co-host from Melbourne, Australia, who got at 4 a.m. this morning. The first thing she heard was you starting the Blitz off, and she is the co-host of this podcast. And we're going to have you back as a special guest for an episode.
That's fine. I'd love to come. I would love to come. And the thing that is real reason is I will start to collect more of the basically Shirley's Law snafus. Okay. And then be able to come and bring you some more examples.
Well, I'm going to leave you with one little twister here, which is when we have you back, one of the main topics is going to be the ABT and people of color. And
okay.
Yep, we're going to get into that topic in a big way. So when we ran the Blitz the first time, 10 minutes into it, somebody tweeted, "Where's all your people of color?" And they were absolutely right. So
just so that you know, Randy, I told Gilda that you basically wanted to check in with her. So I do my assignments.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Maybe I can have a chat with her. Maybe we can have her on as a guest as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for checking in.
Shirley.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Shirley.
Bye.
No
Bye,
enforce the
Shirley.
law. All right. Onward. Do we have the Brian Palermo joining us yet? Let's hope that he does eventually. If not, we can say horrible things about him.
Horrible things it is, Randy. He is not here yet.
Awesome. Okay, let's just run him into the dirt. So he's the next talk in the Blitz, and each one of these I will begin with Mike Strauss's review. So he says for Brian, well, for Shirley, Mike had said she's always great. Mike can't join us; he's on some panel thing or something. But for Brian, he said great follow on to Shirley. He sets up the basics clearly. So then we'll go to Jen for each one of these. Jen, what are your thoughts on the wild
I
man?
just thought it was really good the way Brian set out the three different forces, and particularly I liked that he brought up the evidence of why contradiction is so important, why we have to focus in on this fundamental force of raising problems for people to connect to and what goes on in your brain. I thought that was the perfect stage for then to get all of the audience to want to know more about the three parts of the ABT.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit of an unfair thing I did to him, which is that I didn't give him the chance to talk about improv acting and his whole area of expertise. I used him for his skills as an actor intentionally, had him be the second person because I knew he had, some of the best presentational skills of anybody. And that it works really well in that regard. Let's have Brian lay down the foundation of what the ABT is. And he's so good at the whole thing. So it kind of just fits in there seamlessly. Anybody want to make any comments on Mr. Palermo without him being here? Something mean to say? Come on.
I had the opportunity to
Here we
take
go.
actually his improv class via Zoom. He taught it in January for an open group. And I learned so much in addition to the ABT. But what I also do now, each time I hear him talk, stuff in a way we learned or he emphasized in improv resonates, and I pick up different things. Today I had several light bulb moments again, and so I think this is also in a way a fundamental thing for scientists, that they should be able to take his class. It just provides a very different dimension than the ABT course, and it's hard to describe, but I think one thing is that they still approach the ABT in a very cerebral way, kind of the elements and so on, whereas the improv class, he pounded on us, no, get your head out of the game, just do the gut reaction.
Well, and you heard that from Jose in his talk today, the new edition, the same sort of point. And by the way, Marlis, just a forewarning, you might want to take a look around the room around you just to get you ready for Mike Strauss's comment about your presentation, but we'll get to that shortly. So make you nervous. Who else wants to comment on Palermo? Rochelle, you got any comments about Brian Palermo, the improv guy?
Yeah, actually, I do. I thought it was, so first of all, it was entertaining to me to watch, but really linking the agreement, contradiction, and consequence, and linking that back to how the human brain works and what it is that we really want to hear, and how we solve problems, I think was really key for me. That really struck a chord. And I've spent my career as a wildlife biologist and as a district ranger and a leader in the Forest Service and other agencies, and just starting to piece this together and see how it really can apply to how we tell our story. Is really key. I do want to just go back just a tiny bit, and I wish that Shirley was still here. One of the things that really keeps dinging in my head is transparency. And as a federal agency, whether it's from our science standpoint or from our actions on the ground, we do not do transparency in really plain language for the public very well. And I think that this ABT framework can really help us with that.
You're on your way to being one of the most immediately accepted people of our group in history. You are speaking the language from square one. This is amazing. So yeah, this is great that you'll be a part of Forest Service and us joining in with them, because clearly you get it. And you know what happens with the people that do this stuff, there's a small group that just instantly get it like this, and it's really fun in that regard. And all the people you're seeing in this group are exactly in that crowd. Mike Backus, you got any thoughts? You made a nice comment there in our discussion about the word "but" and how that functioned. You got any thoughts on Palermo's, or did you see Brian Palermo's opening thing on? He just laid out.
I didn't see Brian's thing. I did have a comment on Shirley's, which is, the way I kind of think about it is never lend your parachute to someone else, because when you get it back, you may find out there's a problem far too late.
And real world examples of that. I mean, the one that Shirley cites a lot is Hillary Clinton failing to tell her. I mean, what in the world happened with Hillary Clinton? She had a book, It Takes a Village, in the previous generation, and then they didn't even draw on that in her PR people telling her story. And so there never was a clear story for Hillary, that just left it wide open for the opponents to come up with all their horrible things. And then Shirley's talked about, she lives in Atlanta, and she watched the same thing going on last year with the candidates running for the two senators that succeeded, but all the opposing narratives. And I think part of the way they succeeded was they got out there and told their own story. It's just an endless battle, that stuff.
I think also a lot of times people these days, and I noticed it in dealing with the Clinton White House in the 90s, it's some people just have a hard time making up their minds. And I found often dealing with Democrats, there's just so much internal discussion in trying to build consensus that often no point of view emerges. You just get a lot of hand wringing, but you don't often get a lot of decisive action. It's super easy to criticize the previous administration for all the right reasons you should criticize it, but at the same time, it wasn't afraid of making a stand, no matter how idiotic that stand might be.
Yeah, I think we're slowly working our way deeper into that basic core dilemma because that's what it was talked about. What comes up with scientists. Scientists have 18 different things they want to communicate all at once, and it just doesn't work. You get to some point where it's just all big mush. And there are ways to have your singular narrative be that we've got a lot of things going on here. I mean, it still just has to be a singular message that you're going out there. And maybe that message can be, we've got 8 different things. Then in the next level, we'll get into those things. But to just lead with all 8 things just absolutely doesn't work. So that's a lot of that challenge of Rick's singular narrative. It's funny, like each person gets to own their little piece of the puzzle here, like because of these talks, So Julie becomes the Dobzhansky person, and Marlis is officially our context person. Not that they asked for any of those responsibilities. Let's see. We'll move on to the next one, which was Nancy. Let's see. Mike Strauss said, Nancy, terrific, but there seems to be an issue with syncing in her audio and video that I didn't see on the others. So that's not a very useful comment. Yeah, thanks a lot. Jen, you remember Nancy's on the about coral reefs and the inner outer circle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the key takeaway for me from Nancy was this idea that if you're accustomed to always speaking to your inner circle, you've learned that you can get away with AAA because your inner circle is already invested. They already know what you're on about. You don't have to put any effort. And to me, that kind of, it's not like it lets scientists off the hook, but it gives us some clarity around why not just scientists, but a lot of specialists have never learned anything like the ABT because they haven't needed to. If you only talk to your inner circle, you don't need it. It's wasted effort. Yeah. They're already on board with you. The AAA is fine.
Yeah, that little concentric circle diagram is unbelievably powerful, in large part from the sheer simplicity of it. And in the first time we ran the Blitz, one of the things I said in the discussion at the end was that there are 5 different presentations in the Blitz that are all use that same diagram, including Patty Limerick that puts the fool on the outside of it. And then that's what we've seen in the courses over and over again. That's such a tool. And one of the fascinating things with that simple diagram was no sooner was the Blitz over with the first time than Jade Lovell wrote to me with her great idea about, this is a great diagram. I think we need to add one more circle outside of that for hostile voices. And I wrote back and said, don't be such a scientist, leave it at the 2 things, because the problem is, those 2 things are fundamental because they hit the divide between narrative and non-narrative. And there isn't any third, form of communication. There's only narrative and non-narrative. Either you've got a problem that's being worked on or you don't. And so there's a functionality right there to it. So as soon as you try and move it out there, and then my good friend Liz Foote, equally.
I knew this was coming.
Sorry. Next. She said a diagram. Weren't you the one that wanted to cut it into sectors in the outer circle?
I tried to apply audience segmentation. You were not having it.
You can do that down the line, but don't lose the power of simplicity, which is what starts to happen as soon as you do that. And then there was somebody else. There's 2 other people. I can't remember who that have come at me with, that diagram's so great. We just need to add this and that to it. No, you don't. Just leave it at the simple thing, because what you see is through iteration. It's so powerful, on and on. And Mike, you got thoughts on that? You've seen that diagram quite a bit now, haven't you? That inner outer circle. I mean, don't you see the power of the simplicity there?
Yeah. I mean, and my catchphrase is simplicity is hard.
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us a few words about, so for those of you who don't know, Mike worked with Michael Crichton for more than a decade, who just, was a brilliant communicator. And you said he had a fondness for simplicity in all that he did. A few thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say more than, he had an obsession with it. I mean, Michael Crichton made a career out of taking complex ideas and trying to kind of pare them down so they could be communicated. And he made he wrote a book. He had a Christmas bet one year with a friend of his that he could make Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon epic, popular. And it was a $100 bet. And he wrote this book, Eaters of the Dead, where he basically retells in a very simple way the Beowulf story. And that was just his MO. I mean, he would just, he'd have a simple idea like, oh, let's resurrect dinosaurs from, DNA found in amber, and turn it into something that really kind of just went around the world.
Yeah. And, as I've talked about, I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was saying, and so what you're saying is that had the climate world listened to him for 25 years there, they could have communicated climate somehow. So there could have been a Michael Crichton movie that captured what climate was about. Yeah, that could have happened in a different universe. Unfortunately, as we talk about, he 25 years made his services available. I don't think he actively tried to lobby the science world saying, won't you please let me communicate for you? But I think he was there as a resource. It's clear in the speeches and the talks and things like that. And I think that by the late 90s, he was getting worn out on just, why won't they listen to me? And then I think that the keynote address in 99 that Mike Strauss, of all people, was the one who invited him and set it all up, just really kind of crystallizes the whole thing, which was he gave this, and that the transcript of that speech he wrote is an article in Science. And it's such a powerful article, and it's so ABT. The but to and ratio of it is like 36. You could see the ABT structure there. He laid out 4 different problem solution dynamics for the whole science world on communication, and was completely ignored. And so what do you do after 25 years of offering up advice and hitting a brick wall and being ignored? Eventually you get frustrated. I mean, that's my take on it. You got anything else to add on that, Mike, of what his experience was?
Yeah, I mean, Michael also loved to be a contrarian. And so, if you
Well,
say,
wait a second. I mean, don't you parallel that with the ABT brain?
Yeah.
He was drawn to the contradiction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the classic thing, I think I said, we were walking to lunch one day in Santa Monica, and I said, God, what a beautiful blue sky. He goes, sky's not blue. The Greeks believed it was bronze. And it was just like a classic great moment where all of a sudden I'm going, bronze?
Wait, what did you say? That you said that too fast?
I said the sky's a beautiful blue today over Santa Monica, which it often is. And he said, well, the Greeks used to believe the color of the sky was bronze. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's great in a nutshell.
That's incredible. Where does that? If the Greeks believed it was bronze? What?
Yeah. I mean, if you actually look at it, I looked it up. It's true. A lot of the descriptions of the color of the sky and things like Homer and stuff, they always talk about the beautiful bronze of the sky. And so, yeah, pretty weird.
That's perfect. All right, so let's see on to the next talk, which was let's see.
Rick.
Next one was
next.
Was Rick. Rick was next, and what Mike wrote here was Guido knows better and won't dare criticize Rocco. So going back to the start of our course, we have the chat window, and early on, Mike, Strauss, and Rick are always there. And I appointed them early on as the bouncers of the chat room. And so Guido and Rocco are their nicknames. And it's their job when anybody acts up in the chat window to get in there and force them and throw them out. So that's what he means by that. He wasn't about to criticize Rocco. But that said, let's see. Jen, what have you got for thoughts? One.
Look, Rick, I thought your talk was terrific. And I guess what really stuck with me was this juxtaposition between, yes, the death of one person is a tragedy, but the death of a million is a statistic, versus scientists dismiss one story as an anecdote, and trying to find the common ground between those two things of the singular narratives is everything, but a lot of people with particular disciplinary training will say it's just one story, it doesn't mean anything. And I think trying to tread the ground there is super interesting and hard and worthwhile and all of those things.
Yeah. Exactly. And by the way, a disappointing warning here. All of Mike Strauss's comments are positive about everybody. So there's not going to be there's no dirt. It's all nice things he had to say. Anybody, Marlis, you got any thoughts for Rick there? Or not? Or Julie?
I had a thought, but I forgot it. I was something was crystal clear, but yeah.
Marlis, you had one thing.
You had one thing to do and you couldn't even do that.
I couldn't even remember it. Yeah, sorry, Rick.
Right. Julie, thoughts for Rick?
I think this ties back so much to Nancy's and the inner circle and the outer circle and the simple message. You've got one thing, but it has to be this direct singular narrative. And a lot of times you argue, well, simple is not dumbing it down. And that really, I love what you said, Michael Bacchus, about simple is hard, and really trying to get
I was about to echo that as well. Exactly. You hit the nail on the head there. Simple is hard. I mean, we need to make that one of our catchphrases for this entire training program. That is at the core of everything. If you work with us, we'll get you to simple, but you got to go to the narrative gym, and it ain't easy.
I mean, it's interesting. So I've worked with a couple of people who are constantly dinged by conventional narrative folks. Crichton being one. Everybody said, oh, simple characters, dumb dialogue. I work with James Cameron, who would constantly get dinged for the same thing. Look at this simplistic plotting, and I remember when Cameron was working on Titanic, Variety, the trade paper in Hollywood, had a thing on its front page every day for months. And it was a countdown, days till the Titanic sinks.
Yes. Yes.
And everybody kind of abandoned Jim. And I remember going up to Skywalker Ranch where he was cutting, and asking him to do an interview with me for the Japan Electronics Show. And he was really like alone. And he said, look, this is going to be a really simple story. I think this is really going to go wide and people are going to love this. And everybody just said, tired, not interested.
Yep.
It's too simple. And
yeah. Now that's an absolute fact. In fact, you're reminding me, I need to write something soon about shifting baselines. And that's basically a shifting baselines thing, because at the same time you were doing that was when I was in film school at USC, 1995. And I was in the thick of all these screenwriting courses. And honest to God, the whole meme or whatever it was, the shared opinion there emerged, which is several of the people read the script while it was being shot down in Rosarito and things like that. And this group consensus emerged, which is, why is anybody going to buy a ticket to this thing? You know how it ends. The ship sinks, story over, no suspense. Who in the world is going to go see this movie about a ship sinking? They, honest to God, thought that storytelling was as simple as that. If you don't have a surprise ending, nobody will buy a ticket. And then next thing you know, the thing sweeps the box office and all these, and all the trades, everything. The number of people that were wrong about that thing just showed you nobody knows nothing, which wasn't that, what was that, William Goldman's basic premise of his book? The bottom line in Hollywood is that nobody knows anything. And anybody that comes at you with full head of confidence, narrative is just too elusive. You can't be that confident about it. It's incredible how that all went down. Which brings us then to Julie and what Rick had to say. Julie, front and center. It's time for your report card. What Mike had to say was, this is where it begins to feel like we're getting into technical things. In parentheses, we're using a technical sounding term. She does a great job of explaining it. And that's very true. That's where the Dobzhansky comes in, which is the first kind of thing that isn't super clear. It's got a jargon kind of name to it. And yet it's pretty well positioned there, I think, right after Rick talking about the singular narrative. Now here's a tool to help you get to that. We probably could use a sentence or two that bridges into that. But Jen, what did you think about Julie's terrible presentation? Oh, whoops. Oh,
well,
Julie's
first of all, that it wasn't terrible. No, Julie, my first thought was you picked an excellent example. I think that resonates with everyone around the world, that nothing in my life makes sense right now other than the fact I'm totally fried. So thank you. That was a very good choice. But no, I think...
Which, by the way, isn't that how Shirley began her whole thing with us now? Yeah. She said, I've been on Zoom for 7 hours. I'm terribly fried. Right, exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's about knowing your audience, right? Be relevant to your audience. You immediately made Dobzhansky something that might seem a bit alien relevant, because everyone said, actually nothing makes sense right now other than the fact that I'm completely exhausted. But no, I think for me, Julie, you just reminded me how central Dobzhansky is, and in between the Narrative Blitz and now, I've been out running, and I spent the whole time thinking, if I had to nail down what I would say was the one single thing that you need to think about to make science communication or communication make sense. And I haven't decided yet, Randy. So I think that should be a podcast topic, because first I thought it was about narrative, then I thought it was trust, then I thought maybe it's connection. There's lots of different things. So I think we need to talk about it, Randy.
Yeah,
that's a great topic. You guys need to do that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's some movie where one character is constantly doing it. Here's the one thing that's all about changing it constantly on a treadmill. Let's see, Rochelle, did you have any thoughts for Julie's talk on the Dobzhansky? You're a good kind of test subject for us. Did the Dobzhansky become clear after a while?
It really did. And it actually, I'm working on a project right now where we've been working on this analysis for a really long time. We're getting ready to brief it up the chain. We want to release it out to the wildland fire community, both within the agency and outside the agency. And I started to really think about that. We've been struggling with this briefing paper. We've been struggling with how to actually get this stuff out and transfer this knowledge. And really, how do we distill that down to a one-word theme at the core of that? So what really is that one thing that we want to communicate? And I think that if we can get there, that we'll be off to the races. So thank you, Julie. That was really great.
Now that's really great. And by the way, if you talk with Jeff Morissette in our original AAAS video of 3 or so years ago, he gives a little presentation about the Dobzhansky there and talks a little bit about it. So he's deeply connected with that. Jen, one of the cool things, jumping to one of the other presentations, was hearing in which one? Oh, it was the very last one, Carrie's thing on National Park Service. And we had our buddy Christy Brigham talking about fire and how she used the ABT with the New York Times, all this sort of stuff. So for everybody, if you don't know, we did an episode about 3 or 4 episodes ago with Christy and with this superstar fire expert in Australia. Who was that Australian dude that we brought in, Jen?
Just this random bloke I know called Ewan. He knows a few things about fire.
Also her husband, who was awesome. And yeah, no, that was really great, and great hearing Christy read that whole thing herself. Let's see, anybody got any other thoughts? Rick, you got any thoughts on Julie's Dobzhansky? Rick's a big fan of the Dobzhansky.
Oh man, am I ever. That Dobzhansky hit me like a 2x4 between the eyes the first time I saw it. And you know, Rochelle, for your benefit, I'm a retired 30-year employee. And so it's interesting for me to hear you talk about what you're doing, because I always thought, once I learned about ABT and Dobzhansky, briefing papers are hard, right? Because they're supposed to be short. You know, these upper level management people, they don't want to read anything. And, you know, the standard is a page or less. Well, people, you know, we see this all the time. People want to put everything in there. They want to go back to the beginning of time on something and put everything in there. And yet the Dobzhansky, and that's where I always start when I'm doing ABTs, is the classic tool for briefing papers and a lot of other things, but briefing papers is one example, where if you use it, you're going to nail that one thing down pretty quick. And that's really going to focus that briefing paper very nicely. I wish I'd have known about that when I was working for the government, because I had to oversee briefing paper writing, and oh my God, I would get 5 or 6 page long briefing papers, which is far from brief. So I think, you know, Julie, you always do a nice job with that Dobzhansky. And I think you make it real when you talk about your personal experience as well with, you know, I'm burned out now and everything means nothing. And how do I get to that theme? And so I always enjoy that presentation, because I latched on to Dobzhansky years ago. And when I work with colleagues, that's where we start. We start with, you know, the Dobzhansky.
Let's see, Jen, what were you just saying there? You want to share that with us?
Well, I just looked at the time and realized we've only got about, 20 plus minutes to go, and we're still in the first of 4 blocks of the Blitz. So, Randy, the fact that you thought we might get through the whole Blitz in one episode just shows what a gullible optimist you are. And I think we need to do like one episode on each of the 4 blocks at least, because there's so much to say, right?
There really is, yes. And yet the whole challenge is to be concise.
Well, we're not doing that well, Randy. Sorry, we're not doing that well at all.
So you're right. We're done with the first block. And now one other little comment to toss in. As soon as the thing ended today, I called up Matt, and he and I were talking. And the first time that we ran this back in April, we did have over 1,500 people RSVP'd for it. So we had a huge turnout for that one. Part of that was National Park Service threw a lot of weight behind promoting it. This time around, it was more independent. It wasn't nearly as large of a crowd, but it was plenty. It was fine. And yet, I was explaining to Matt, one of the trade-offs that we make with this is that if this were supported by some big grant or something like that, it would have begun with 5 to 10 minutes of introduction of thank yous to everybody. And here's all the logos of all the different programs and all this sort of European diplomatic stuff, which is all nice. But what I love is the Blitz just takes off, at flat out breakneck speed with Shirley. Ba-boom, we're into it. And that's really great. And that's so important. And on a separate note, one of the things just recently, I've forgotten who I was trading emails with, somebody in the political world, but you take a look, one of the greatest speeches in American history was Mario Cuomo's speech at the 1984 DNC convention. And he began his first paragraph. He said, I could start this speech with the usual pleasantries and poetry and things like that, but the time is too urgent right now. Therefore, I'm getting right into what the issue is at hand, which is that Reagan is ruining our country. And every, good speech should begin with that sort of urgency. And then, look at a lot of bad speeches. They sit there and they thank everybody. And, a lot of those people are like, don't thank us. Just get to what we're here to talk about. We don't need the thanks. You put that at the end. So anyhow, that's my feeling with this thing, is that the thanks is in engaging everybody so that they're going to stick around for the whole time and get the whole message out of it.
That's
and you're right.
We're going to end up every public television show made possible by
exactly.
Trump.
Exactly.
I also think it gets back to this idea that you should always consider cutting your first act of your story, like just taking it out of the way, because so many people, the biggest mistake they make is they extend the setup long beyond its sell-by date.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the quote that I use in the little narrative book is from Annie Dillard, novelist, who said that a novelist always finishes the first draft and then throws away the first chapter, because you don't know how to open the story until you're done with it. Then you go back and you figure out exactly, and you open it really efficiently. And that's the same thing with the ABT, that blue material up front, which is going to lead us closer to Marlis's presentation coming soon to a theater near us. And we will end up probably some of the later ones having to summarize quickly, but we'll move on to block number 2, which starts with Diana Padilla, who maybe isn't here with us, but was awesome today. She stuck around for the discussion afterwards. And what Mike said is, Diana, love, all in caps, LOVE, the image. Oh, this is more about John Rail. Mike said, love the image of burning proposals with a mouse. I think it's a rat sitting there next to it. Leaves one with an almost biblical image of, quote, abandon hope, all ye whose proposals land here. Diana was horrified by that graphic. John couldn't help himself. He had to get creative with it and make the stack of proposals. I was going to ask her a question about that. But, she's such an enormously powerful resource in the course because of her full career as an NSF writer, reviewer, and then as a rotator program officer. She spent a whole year at NSF. So she's just got tons and tons of knowledge and experience in proposal writing. And one of the coolest things about her participation has been a giant validation of what we've been on to, because last year in the very first round in April, when we first started the course, I invited her just to listen in. And all of a sudden she started sending me emails saying all these bells are going off, especially with Park Howell, of all the crazy things, the guy from the business world. She called me up that day and said, he's talking about the importance of the audience, and he's talking about this narrative spiral. This is the same stuff in writing proposals. And the idea of pulling these distant disciplines together, as we have with Patty Limerick and history and Park from business and on these actors and all that stuff, that's when this stuff is really getting into really good, genuinely creative, improved communication that's beyond this kind of one-dimensional idea of, I'm a science communicator, I only communicate, only interested in science. So I love that Diana's gotten so deeply into this, and she's been a hugely enthusiastic participant over and over again. I mean, sitting through over and over again, in the 14 rounds of the course. Some days I get on and there's her name sitting there listening. A lot of days I think she just plays it on the side in her office. Jen, you had some thoughts on Diana?
Oh, look, I just thought Diana nailed it, Randy. I mean, if we jump ahead to Liz and think about the ABT as a bit of a cult, but a cult where, we want more members because we don't have money or charisma, no offense, Randy, then, if we see that there are going to be a whole lot of researchers out in the world who are skeptics about the value of the ABT and the value of narrative more generally, to me, Diana nailed it, because she put it right in its place of, this is about money. If you want to get money, this is a tool you have to use. And, in Australia, we have one of our biggest funding bodies, the Australian Research Council. And for some of the schemes, success rates are down at, 8, 9, 10%. It is so hard to get funding. I would have thought any reticent, convert to narrative, if you say, well, actually, your chances are going to go up by whatever percentage if you just adopt this relatively simple, although, yes, Dunning-Kruger, it's not that simple, but, a straightforward tool you can start to learn about and adopt to make your story more compelling. We know this, but we don't know this. If you give them money, I can fix it. I mean, I just thought Diana nailed it. And lots of people, if they're not going to sit through the whole blitz, they should at least listen to Diana as an argument for why this stuff matters.
Yeah. And by the way, we're going to keep going until a quarter after for today, because we've got so much to cover here. It's a special that we're doing for all this. Other thoughts on Diana and proposals?
Yeah, I'll chime in, because she was one of the additions that was just so serendipitously critical to the success. And you folks that have been on this a while know that one of the things we got early on was from the hardcore science people, the proposal writers, was kind of a yeah, we can see how that might work for you, your other fluffy stuff, but we're writing proposals. And when Diana showed up and started talking about it from her perspective, that pretty much put the kibosh to that whining and crying about stuff, because she brought it right home to those very people, right? With perfect examples that I do this for a living and it works for me type thing.
Well, and one of the things that I tried to work into her talk there that's not in there, but in one of the sessions she had talked about when she's on a panel and she's got 25 proposals to read, she begins by going to whatever it is, the summary type thing that's like a one-page thing. And she says if she gets halfway through that thing and she finds herself kind of squinting, like what's being talked about here? If that starts to happen, it's I see your hand gesture, Rochelle. Yeah, it's over with. That's it. Done. It goes into that rat-infested burning pile. And I was going to ask her in the Q&A, how often do those proposals ever come back from that pile? And probably the answer is just about zero. But I just love the idea of that moment where you're halfway through just the summary. And as soon as you know what it's like, as soon as you start to find it hard to follow what this is about, it's done and over with. It's, it makes me think of, there's a famous saying from the world of sailing about when do you reef your sails? When you're out there sailing and the wind starts to pick up, you pull the sail down, make it smaller, you reef it. And then sailors say, when do you reef your sails? And the answer is the first moment you think of it, because it's already too late. Why did you think of it? Because you almost got blown over right now, which means now you're going to have to pull those sails in the middle of this gust that's, this gale that's just kicked up. And so it's the similar sort of thing. When is a proposal done for? It's the first moment that the person starts squinting, like, oh, I'm having trouble getting through this. That's probably over with right there. One more comment, anybody on Diana? Yeah.
I've got one actually. Yeah, I just was thinking of all of the grant proposals that I was grinding out when I was a grad student, and the ones that were rejected, the ones that were, approved and granted. This would have been really helpful 25 years ago. I would have sweated a lot less and really not agonized quite as much over whether or not that funding would come through, whether it was for graduate research or for doing research on different chunks of federal land that I've worked on.
Yeah.
What do they say, Rochelle? Better late than never?
That's what they say. My mother used to say a day late and a dollar short, which is actually a little more accurate for me.
Well, I was going to quote the line from Adam Sandler from, The Wedding Singer. He says, these are all things I could have used to have known yesterday. Yeah. And in fact, same thing I tell about in the Houston book. I gave a talk on the ABT at Princeton, and the first person in the Q&A was a woman who raised her hand and said, while you were talking, I was working at the ABT for all the chapters of my dissertation. I wish I'd had this tool 3 or 4 years ago. It would have helped so much. So we're getting there slowly but surely, and this will continue to spread. This fall, the course is booked all the way into early next year, basically. So it's the word's getting around. And interestingly, there's yet to be even one article written about the whole ABT framework. We've yet to do any sort of, we don't have to do any advertising at this point. The word of mouth is just sending it all around, which is wonderful. Let's see. Next presentation was this friend of mine, Liz, and Mike. His only thing he said was Keanu would be happy.
He's always happy, isn't he? Except in that one photo.
Yeah, except that photo where he's sitting there up on the beam with all the black and white construction workers, depressed, eating a sandwich. And yeah, Liz, let's see, Jen, tell us a thought or two about Liz and her wonderful, the Liz moment.
Well, first, I'm jealous that you've got the Liz moment, because I'm just desperately thinking one day, will I be good enough to get a Jen moment? And then I just loved your personal story about how the ABT was basically your savior to prevent you from being publicly humiliated that you wanted to include the Keanu meme in your talk. Because, who wants to out themselves as a dork? Not me at all. But no, I just think I just think that personal story is really important. And I think the tweets are interesting too, because it takes me back to Shirley's message. I often tell my students, if you want to, if you're giving a talk, send out a tweet yourself with the main message of your talk, so that the rest of the audience doesn't make it up and get it wrong. And the fact that you didn't have to do that, and yet the audience still got the messaging right in their tweets about your talk, that's a pretty strong testimony, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely. Go ahead.
Well, can we make this episode 5 hours? Because you're right, Jen. There's so much to be said on all these sorts of things. But here's one that overlaps with Liz. My good buddy, Greg Tillman, who is an editor of major shows, was a film school classmate, and he was the executive producer and editor of Night Stalker on Netflix back in February. That was #1 for a few weeks there, true crime drama. And he and I were talking last weekend, and I've mentioned this before. We've got these two parallel experiences of two instances of somebody writing a simple ABT text and then letting other people come in and edit it. And what you see is they change all the content. They don't change the form. Once you lock onto that ABT structure, it's almost impossible for somebody to rewrite it into an and. So Greg had that happen with this awesome movie, Operation Odessa, that's also on Netflix. And he was the editor of that. And he called me up the day that he first crafted the opening screen graphic. And he said, I used your ABT here to craft this thing. And it said, it's about these three gangsters in Florida, and said they were this, they were this, they were this, but they were never this. Therefore, here's their whole story. That was the opening. And over the next year, over and over again, the editors and the writers and everybody came in, the producers, and they rewrote the whole thing. By the time it came, to the screen, it was no words except the structure was still there. No one ever got it away from that. And then Liz had the same experience at that conservation meeting where they asked her to write a statement for the Marine Reserve being made. She wrote an ABT structure. People came in, rewrote the content. But once you hit that form, it's pretty tough to get away from it. Am I right about that, Liz?
Yes, absolutely. This goes back to a couple of years after my moment, and I was at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. I was tasked to write the intervention statement for the motion to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030. And there's this whole team, but I had to write this one page. I framed it with an and paragraph, like the setup, why it's so important to protect the ocean. The but was, at that time, there was less than 2% of the ocean protected. And the therefore is how this would go towards helping just improve conservation at a global scale, and turned it over to the group. Everyone just hacked away at it, mostly the content, but the form stayed the same. So in the end, it kept the same and paragraph, but paragraph. I started with a however, and then the therefore paragraph was like a so paragraph. So it stayed, it made it strengthened the whole concept, and it kept that form.
It's really amazing. Mike, you got any thoughts about that once you lock onto the form, people can't rewrite it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing in role-playing games where they talk about dungeon dressing, where once you've got the map, you can fill in the blanks. You can put a treasure here, you can put a monster here, yada, yada, yada. But what happens is the map doesn't change. And so once you found a narrative map and locked into it, then people will negotiate about the dungeon dressing, but they won't mess with the map.
That's pretty powerful. Yeah, no, and we see it over and over again. And Rick, what was the thing you and I were talking about yesterday where you said that, well, the problem is they haven't, that person hasn't hit their Liz moment yet. What was that we were talking about?
That was you and your banjo.
Oh.
What? All right, tell us this story.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. So yeah, I was true confessions. I learned to play the 5-string banjo in Kansas in college, and I got pretty good at it, but I never developed intuition. And every song I ever knew how to play was only because I memorized all the tablature off the books and things like that. And 2.5 years ago, when my house burned down, my priceless banjo burned up with all the music, sheet music and everything I had over the ages. But I swear to God, as creative as I know I can be with filmmaking and other things, and as a scientist, I think I did some creative work. For some reason, with musical instruments, there was not one iota of creativity inside of me. And then Rick and I were talking about it. He's a guitarist, and he said, oh yeah, when I learned to play the guitar, I finally hit a point where I could just do jamming and, all kinds of things like that. And I said, I never hit that point. And then he said, oh, you never hit your Liz moment. So that's the bottom line. It's true. How sad. One of the tragedies of my life. Okay, moving on to the next talk, which was Marlis, and what Mike had to say about that. It just hit me that the desk behind her is spotlessly clean and empty. That can't be an academic's desk. There you go, Marlis. I warned you. He had commentary on your background. He questions your academic credentials based on the cleanliness of your desk.
Is that because of the awards I gave you guys based on just the appearance of your office, like Room Raider, the Twitter account? Did you clean it up after I mocked everyone's background?
Did you give her one? Because clearly, I mean, I see what he's saying. Once she started talking, I looked at her background. Yeah, God, that's immaculate. Let's see here. And then he says, more seriously, I'm not sure the quote, and by the way, an accompanying image of communications book is needed. Last time people wanted to know what those books were. Well, that's my addition I forced into your thing there. Oh, and by the way, yeah, what was it? Made to stick and resonate, both those things. Well, that's maybe an inner circle thing from me, indulging my own inner circle interests. So guilty as charged. The one thing I wanted to say about your talk on context, and I'll try and state this pretty simply and quickly, but once upon a time long ago, 30 years ago, when I was still a professor at the University of New Hampshire, I ended up going up on the coast of Maine and shooting this film that was 3 lobster fishermen, 2 brothers and their father, that was all done in one evening. We got them to sit down in their fishing shed and drink a lot of alcohol and tell stories. And it was tremendous. And what we captured that night was unbelievable. The alcohol was a major factor because it got them completely uninhibited. And they told stories from inside their world that normal PBS crews would never get out of these guys. They told us years later, you know, there was an element of trust there and alcohol and everything like that. And I had a crew of 5 or 6 guys that were awesome. The chemistry was great. I put it together into 2 forms, a half-an-hour form and an hour form. And it was aired on Maine PBS way back then, just sort of within the state. As we did screenings and you listened to feedback, what you heard was people who watched the half-hour form said, oh, that really touched me in my heart. People who watched the hour version said it made me cry. And you could not get people in a half an hour to the point of crying, but you could with the hour version. The hour version had so much context and setup. And if you invested into it and really got deeper and deeper into their world, then when it got to the end, the main guy, this 350-pound, 6'5" lobster fisherman guy who lived his whole life there and talked with this thick down east accent. And he just talked about how our lifestyle's going away. And it was called Salt of the Earth. And he just said, you know, his little catchphrase was, people read the papers too much, that the whole outside world was coming in, the tourists and everything like that. And it ain't like it used to be. And it was really sad, you know, and kind of sentimental in that regard. But the key point was, it was all a function of the extent of context. And furthermore, when I finally sent the thing in, this was 1991 or 2, I sent it into some PBS station in Minnesota that said they were looking for cultural programming. And they got in touch with me and they said, we're doing a kind of montage of different bits from other documentaries. Would you be up for us using the 3 minutes where the guy starts crying at the end of your film? And I said, hell no, you know, because there's no context there. Why are these guys crying? It doesn't make any sense if you don't invest the hour to get us into their world and see what's at stake. That's what melodrama is about. You know, melodrama is unmotivated emotion and drama. And when you cut right into the contradiction or something, and you don't do all that context, then that's when it's just phony and stupid. So it's so important, your thing. And I think that was interesting, the discussion we had later in the Blitz there, where we were all coming around to agreeing that, you know, the blue stuff, that's where the art is. That's the real challenge. Mm-hmm. The button, the therefore are relatively easy. Jen, did you have some thoughts on Marlis's talk on context?
Yeah, I think for me, Marlis, you helped me to work out kind of where I am on my current Dunning-Kruger curve with the ABT, because I've definitely been guilty of thinking that the and stuff is easy. And with my students, you know, with this came out later in our discussion that, come on, surely it's easy. Just tell us what you know and then tell us what we don't know. And then get the exciting bit is the but. And I think your talk really made me realize for lots of us, we don't get the context right. We don't know how to clarify exactly, you know, you don't want to alienate your audience, but you don't want to be condescending to your audience, and working out how to get in the middle there with the context, you know, the Goldilocks zone of context, I think is hard. And I don't know that I'm doing a very good job of teaching that to my students at the moment, but I'm going to try and get better.
Well, part of the problem is you weren't taught very well because you took the course in the first 2 rounds when we ourselves did not know, because we'd done story circles for 5 years telling people exactly that. You want to get rid of the rule from the South Park guys was every time you remove an and replace it with a but, or therefore the storytelling gets more interesting. That's as much as we knew. It wasn't until we did probably about 400 ABT builds now at this point, when you do the math on how many people have gone through this course in a little over a year. And it was about the 4th round or so that we began to get this realization. Wait a second, there's a lot going on in that blue material. It's so unbelievably interesting. The depths we're running the risk of getting too inner circle to some extent, but that's not the case, because we're uncovering things about narrative structure that no one's ever realized before. And one of the things that we're seeing is, it goes on and on, but the thing I mentioned about kids, and high school and college kids, they don't understand context yet. And you ask them to write at ABT and they put the problem in the blue material. They go right to the problem. They don't know context. And then furthermore, I swear to you, in my career as a scientist, there were numerous times where there'd be a departmental seminar. The person come and give a younger scientist would give a talk. The people in the audience would be offering comments, things. And then eventually some senior stateswoman or statesman in the, one of the senior people with a whole career of knowledge would speak up, and in an instant they would say, this work is important because it does this and this, and they put it into context and all the pieces come together. It was never anybody young that could talk that way. That just comes with age and getting the big picture and the context. Mike, you got any thoughts on context and narrative and novels and things like that?
Well, I was watching an amazing interview of the screenwriter John Milius by Francis Coppola, who's interviewing him, about Apocalypse Now. And I learned a lot about, Apocalypse Now is a really fascinating script, because what I didn't know is it was inspired by Dr. Strangelove. So the idea was, it was inspired by one of the great all-time Black comedies. And if you look at Apocalypse Now through that lens, it's all over the place. But the wires are hidden really well. It plays as a drama, yet structurally it is a Black comedy. And it's just fascinating to me, because it was just the intention with which Milius put together his blue material really makes the story of Heart of Darkness, which is what is providing the underlying structure, really pop. And
So are you saying that it was a kind of a mix of Dr. Strangelove and Heart of Darkness?
Yeah, Heart of Dark. It is the story of Heart of Darkness. It's
right.
Going up the river to find Kurtz, who's gone mad.
Right.
But the absurdity of it, with characters like the Robert Duvall characters, the Colonel, all of that kind of absurdity is the same kind of absurdity you see in Dr. Strange.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild.
Like when Duvall turns and goes, someday this war is going
to... Wait. Say that line again. You locked up. I missed it. When Duvall says what?
When Duvall says, someday this war is going to be over, and he's kind of wistful and just walks away.
Okay,
Excellent. Okay, let's see.
Hold on.
Yes.
So I have
Marlis.
to have the opportunity to tell my own story, right?
I
actually have 3 things to say. The one to Chen, it's indeed that the context, I find, is the hardest thing to teach to students. And indeed, they do not have the breadth of the knowledge yet. And it's very fascinating to see with PhD students, as they reach, after 4, sometimes 5 years, they have finally accumulated enough knowledge to build that blue material, to put their research in that context, but you don't see it early on. The second thing, I can remember one thing at the time. The second thing was important, but I really forgot it. And the third thing, I come back to it later. But the third thing is I have to tell my own story about my desk.
Okay.
And
defend yourself.
Defend myself in defense of the Swiss orderliness of the desk. I always liked orderliness. I always liked it clean. And so Julie can attest to this. The rest of our house looks pretty much like that. And actually, when I was a child, I could not go to bed before I didn't clean up my room. So I was probably the opposite of all other children. Even in Switzerland, not all children are orderly, but it was so it's kind of my world gets into sync, and I reach my zen zone. Now that they keep the desk so empty, uncluttered, is really so I can try to focus on that one thing in front of me. I get so easily distracted, and I find this the hardest thing. Focus is on that one thing. So not having a cluttered desk helps me with that.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the main things from your presentation that echoes in my mind is just your voice saying the ABT.
Yeah, because you made me say it very slowly. You said, "Oh, your accent, they don't understand it, so say slow, ABT." I can say ABT very fast, but then you didn't want to, so I want the re-recording and be able to speak way faster.
I think it's awesome. It always echoes in my mind. The ABT. Nice. Excellent. Okay, and let's see. You know what? Jen, we did that special before on fire. It was 90 minutes. So I'm going to keep going all the way up to 90 minutes or whatever, 88 minutes. Because we got so many more things to say. We'll get through it all by the end here. The next one was Keisha. Keisha's not with us. I think she was going to try and join us, but okay. Let's see what he had to say about her. Keisha, this is great. It sets up this all-important theme we'll hit again as it goes along, which is the Christmas tree analogy. And the Christmas tree and the box of ornaments, I love that thing. And in doing that video with her, it hit me that idea that her training in communications up until the ABT framework course was a box of ornaments. Yes, she got lots of little bits and pieces, and you see this in lots of these courses, a whole long list of here's tips and techniques to make you a better communicator, which is fine. It's and, nothing wrong with and. It's just that there's a better way to do this if you've got a model for it. Jen, your thoughts on the Christmas tree?
Well, before I go on to the Christmas tree, Randy, as your newly anointed co-host, I have a proposition for you. Given that we've spent an hour and 7 minutes on not even getting through the first half, I don't want to do a disservice to all the rest of the talks. I think we should stop at the halfway point and do another episode on the second half of the Blitz, my friend. Otherwise, we're just going to be rushing. So you think about that while I talk.
I think that's a very good point, and we can get those other people on. The problem is we're booked for the next few weeks, so
that's okay.
Okay, previews of coming attractions. Next week, we've got the two fisheries people. We're going to dive into Seaspiracy and tear that thing to pieces, and also talk about my octopus teacher, who side-by-side documentaries. The week after that, we'll be doing our teaching thing with Keisha and Liz Peterson from ESA. So the next 2 weeks are booked, but then maybe the week after that we could do it. So that was.
Can we have a show of hands? Who votes for my proposition that we do the second half?
Oh yeah.
Another time. I win.
Okay.
Okay, back to Keisha.
Yeah, okay. Were you voting that we wrap it up in the next few minutes?
No, just that I think we can talk about Keisha and we can talk about Marissa, and then we can take advantage of these wonderful people we have on the episode with us today for a little chat for 10 minutes, and then we do the second half another time.
No, I totally agree with that, except that Mike is here, so we definitely want to dive into his talk.
Okay, well, we can do that. Mike can be the added bonus to what we've got left. So Keisha, then Marissa, then Mike. How does that sound?
Passes across my face.
Okay, so for Keisha, I just love the analogy of the Christmas tree, and I think it's a really useful analogy because we all understand what a Christmas tree is. We all understand that you can add any number of ornaments. At some point, maybe you get quite too many ornaments. I mean, yeah, I just think it's a really useful analogy, and I just like that she got to the point of saying she realized that she had to have a systematic approach to narrative if she wanted to try and teach it. And that's exactly where I'm at. And I can't wait to have a conversation with Keisha about that, because this systematic approach, I think, is super powerful. And we all agree that the ABT is the right approach we want to use. Potentially there's others, but we all just agree that there has to be a way to approach it that is more than just, you need to tell a story, which is what we hear all the time.
Something else. I worked with some epidemiologists in the past 6 months over the pandemic, and there's a little bit of a problem that went on with the pandemic communication, which was another week, another metaphor, another analogy. And they came up with so many analogies. Oh, it's like a car. Oh, it's like it's like a spaceship. Oh, it's like a this, it's like a that. And at some point, you start blurring the audience. So wait, you've told us 8 other analogies of what this thing is like. There's a limitation to analogies, and a lot of what's gone on with the building of this ABT framework is that we've tossed things out there and they've only stuck around through selection, namely that inner outer circle diagram. I threw that together 3 years ago, just thought I'd, fly it out there and see if it caught fire. It did. It's really part of the firmament now of the ABT framework. And all of these things, we toss them out there, and if they don't catch fire, we're not using them further. But the Christmas tree one is one that's really caught fire, and you see people putting it to use, and that's when I think we begin to look deeper into it as to why it's so powerful and useful. Marlis, what were you just typing in there? Some comment?
I remembered my second important point, which was
Go for it.
which actually related to the topic of my ABT, kind of little video, which was that context differed for all these groups in Kirsten's presentation about the feral cats. That they had a hard time, all these different stakeholders who came from very different backgrounds, perspectives, animal lovers and conservationists, invasive species biologists, that they all had a very different context, how they looked at the problem. But once they kind of could agree, the problem is, where do all these cats come from? We have too many cats, where do they come from? Therefore, we now find the solution we all can agree on too. That really resonated with me, that when I was just answering a comment about this in conservation, we often have this, you talk to different stakeholders, landowners, conservationists, environmentalists, and so on, and how do they bring all on board? So I think her story was very, very powerful. Context is really dependent who your inner and who your outer audience is.
Cool. And Rick and Liz, what are you guys whispering about?
Oh yeah.
Conservation social science and the need for social scientists to be more engaged in conservation, because the social scientists really get that context thing.
Rick, what
Yeah.
was Rick, what was your famous quote that you said a long time back about all
Nothing in
no, you see, it was from your conservation world.
Yeah, it was all conservation problems are social, but we give them to biologists to solve.
I wrote it on my whiteboard and have a photo of it.
Yeah, that's really a great line. All conservation problems are social, but we give them to biologists to solve, and therein lies the problem. And by the way, I was on that panel yesterday with that German film. And one of the things that Mike, by the way, this, I meant to send this to you. This is exciting. So this gets set up by the summer of 2004, when at the height of the election of George W. Bush after 4 years was running against Kerry. And Mike got in touch with me and said he was part of a group of people who were trying to raise enough funds. They were going to buy a field in western Kansas, a giant wheat field. And they were going to go out there and have the farmer cut all the wheat down into 4 letters that were so large you could read them from outer space. And the letters would be HELP, help. That's how bad things were at the height of the Bush era. And Mike, whatever happened with that project?
I just couldn't figure out where I was going to put the wheat that we harvested. It was just, the silo rental was just going to be
oh my God,
too big of a burden.
That was one of those projects when he told me about it. All I could say is, God, I hope that happens. That would have been so amazing. And so in the spirit of that, yesterday in this discussion, the guy had said, okay, last thing, this is all about their film in 2054, where all nature's been run to extinction. And then he said, we're going to do this thought exercise, which is, if you had unlimited resources, what would you do with them to try and save nature? And I said, well, here's what my thing would be, is I would go buy the Capitol Mall in Washington, D.C., and then I would have a monument built on it with letters as the same height as the Washington Monument, and they'd be tilted a little bit so they could be read from outer space, and it would be 5 words. And the 5 words would be from that Michael Crichton speech, which is, scientists do not understand media. And therein lies the problem. That goes back to Rick's thing there, which is all these problems are social and they're given to biologists to solve. Crichton said it, scientists do not understand media. What that means is they need to partner with politicians and media people that know how to effectuate science-informed policy. But somehow this idea has risen in recent years, I think, in a lot of the science community, which is it's time for us to get out there and lead society. That ain't going to work. And so hate to be pessimistic to them. And I know they don't like to hear that, but everybody's got their own little roles. And I want to live in a science guided society, but not led by the scientists.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam Curtis summed it up, I think in Century Itself, maybe, or one of his earlier ones where he talked about the engineer's plot, where almost everybody who was part of the Russian Revolution had backgrounds in engineering, which led to this idea of a 5-year plan. And the story that gets told in the Adam Curtis documentary is that all of a sudden these giant wrought iron chandeliers started crashing out of the ceilings of all of these buildings around the Soviet Union because the wrought iron companies started making the chandeliers heavier so they could use more wrought iron so they could meet their quotas. And that's the problem in these things, where you don't often know how things are going to go wrong.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. And Jen, are you aware of the story that took place in the mid 1980s when I was living there in your fine country, and the Tasmania elected a new prime minister who was a hydroelectric engineer, and he brought on for all of his different offices all of his buddies from graduate school that were all hydroelectric engineers, and they decided as a group that it was time to build a giant dam somewhere in Tasmania, and they chose the Franklin River Gorge with all of its Aboriginal caves and findings and things like that. And they started to try and ramrod that through. The public rose up, and they ended up holding a ballot initiative in which they put out 2 different sites, the Franklin Gorge and one other one, and they let everybody vote between the 2. And the majority of votes were written in for no dam, and they ignored those, and then they picked the one. Do you know that whole story, Jen?
No, I think I'm a bit young. I was probably in about grade 2 or grade 3 primary school at that stage. But I mean, I can understand, I can get the gist of the story.
Yeah, no, exactly.
When politicians get it very wrong.
It was tragic because they were just determined one way or the other, we're going to build a hydroelectric dam here somehow, some way. And the public rose up and said, we don't need it. Don't ruin our beautiful countryside. And they went and did it. And I don't know what the upshot of it all was, but I was there for all of that stuff, and it was a big calamity. And that's the same sort of thing Mike's talking about, which is
absolutely
their agenda like that. Craziness. Let's see. So then we're getting right near the end here. So let's just jump to my good friend Mike Backus and his awesome talk. And here is what I wish Jose could have joined us, because I thought Jose's was great, and that was the one addition to this Blitz, and everybody seemed to really love. Jose's talk was about the Meisner acting teacher and Harvey Keitel. In fact, Jose sent me an email right afterwards and said he loved the 2 photos of Harvey Keitel that we threw in there for him. And then here's what, let's see, Mike had said about Jose's talk. Great addition. It tells us we need to not always be in our heads. And we put him right before Mike's because Mike's was also about simplicity. And then what he had said about Mike's talk, love this. Michael Crichton was one of the most thoughtful and insightful of many speakers I worked with at AAAS. And yes, the press didn't ever, quote, get what he was really saying. So Jen, did you have some thoughts on Mike's talk about Michael Crichton?
Look, I just didn't know the full story of Michael Crichton and kind of the arc of his career. So I found it really interesting. And I know this wasn't your main point, but you raised the question around, do we dismiss him and his body of work because of how, where he ended up standing in relation to science later in his career. And I just think that's such an interesting question to ask, because how do we judge people in the first instance? And, people change their minds, people change their perspectives. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that, Michael. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, it's interesting. I worked on 7 of his books and parted ways right as he did his book about climate change. And the thing that always struck me about him was he would come up with a really, really good central core idea, and then he would just research it to death. So he got his blue material down. And that was his whole approach to writing is that he would clean his desk before he started every project. And he'd clean his office. He'd have a week of cleaning. He'd just get everything clean. And then he would assemble this extraordinarily large body of research that he was going to explore before he set the plot of the book. And it was wild because, like in the case of Jurassic Park started out as a totally different book. He had been reading Alice Miller, the Swiss psychoanalyst, who wrote a famous book called Drama of the Gifted Child about child abuse and smart kids and what happens there. And the original Jurassic Park, which I think I'm one of the few people who actually read it, the original Jurassic Park, the climax of the story was the cathartic moment when the little boy sees his abusive mother eaten by a velociraptor. And when the publishing company read that version of the book, they convinced Michael to just throw it out. Just like, this is never going to work. And he was so frustrated, having already written the book, that he blasted through the second version and made it much simpler. And I don't think it actually would have become the giant hit it became had he not actually been in a rush to make the simplest version of that story he could.
Interesting. Wow. Let's see. Rochelle, did you have a comment there? Oh, no, you're talking about your sock drawer, and you guys have gone off in a side tangent about desk organization. Your comment about Michael Crichton cleaning up his desk suddenly set off a whole firestorm of comments on desk organization.
I would like to ask Michael.
Lost the narrative. Keep going. Yes.
You know that this excessive researching of details and accumulating so much information, I think most scientists really can relate to this because we get lost in it. How did he manage to get back to the simplicity? I mean, your example that he was kind of mad that they ripped his book apart, and so therefore he kind of, to spite them, just threw something on paper. Is this maybe an approach scientists should use, that they say, okay, I only give myself 5 hours to write this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that Crichton did consistently was he would use an Excel spreadsheet, and he would start writing at exactly the same time every day, 6:30 in the morning, and he would stop at 12:30 and go to lunch, and he'd have the same lunch every day while he was working on that project. And so he had this Excel spreadsheet where he would track his word count, and he would know about by day 3 when he was going to finish the book. And so what he did was he put all these structures in place so that he wouldn't worry about the things that a lot of writers normally worry about. How long is this going to take? What am I going to do? What's my day going to look like? How am I going to avoid being distracted? Yada, yada, yada. And he just pared that down and kept it really simple. And his deep dive into the subject was simply so that he could have the fluency to find those interesting tidbits that make a story pop. In other words, he studied the tree ad nauseum so that he would find the Christmas ornaments to put on it.
That's amazing. So Mike doesn't like to get into anything that could be seen as controversial about Crichton. But I'll go ahead and push you a little bit on this topic, which is in 2007, when I was making my movie Sizzle Global Warming Comedy, Mike put me in touch with Crichton through email. And for about 3 or 4 months, we traded a series of about 40 or 50 emails, and it was really fascinating. And we got into depth on this stuff. And by then he was deeply into the climate skeptic movement. And at one point, he kept referring to parts of his book, State of Fear, which I had not read, and I was trading emails with him, and he finally got annoyed with me. He said, I'm not carrying on this conversation any further until you read the book. So I went and got it, and it's really a pile of garbage, that book. You know, it's just really so far off the tracks, and it's just amateurish writing. Even the storytelling, you know, is stick figures, and worse than most any of his books. What in the world went wrong there at the end to send him off into such a bizarre agenda-driven book, which is clearly what that was. I mean, I don't know. You probably don't want to go into much detail.
No, I don't mind. I don't mind at all. Actually, he had an enormous amount going on in his life at that time, and so he was in the process of getting divorced. It was an incredibly contentious divorce. His child was involved in this contentiousness, and he was super, super pissed about. He'd gone and read the big climate change report and was extremely frustrated with what he felt was the weak sauce of the current state of science at that time. And so, and that really kind of energized him to become a climate skeptic. And he became friends with that epidemiologist in Scandinavia, whatever his name is.
Bjorn Lomborg.
Yeah. And they just kind of fed each other's like nuts about it. And I mean, really, I couldn't even talk to him about it because I just thought, to me, it just seemed a bit nonsensical. I understand why he came to that point. I just deeply disagree.
Well, remember, you even warned me. You said he's probably going to recommend you interview Bjorn Lomborg. That's exactly what happened. I got an email back where he said, you don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to Lomborg. And I know that guy was really a marginal character. And then you told me that, he's talking about him being the Lomborg. They're persecuting Lomborg like Galileo and all these sorts of crazy things that he was saying. And it was so far off the tracks. At one point, he sent me a photograph of a little weather box on a telephone pole somewhere in Nevada, I think near Reno. And he said, this is the kind of weather stations that make up the climate mapping. And I just wrote back, are you kidding me? NASA and all their giant databases, this is maybe some odd little outlier, but no, it was really crazy. But for such a smart guy, there is just hours more that we can talk about all these sorts of things, as you said, Jen, but we are now out of time. And so we will, 3 weeks from now, Jen, you can hold me to this. We will reconvene to do the second half of the whole thing. I will try and pressure as many of those people to show up and do the same sort of discussion as we've done. Probably even pressure Mike to come back and talk some more because his talk fits into that last session. But this is just really testament to how packed with thoughts the whole Narrative Blitz is. And here's one of the last things I will say that is utterly crazy. Patty Limerick will talk about this. We'll make sure that she comes to the thing because she spoke in the course probably 2 or 3 or 4 times. And every time she spoke, there was the usual 1 or 2 comments and questions and things like that. And then 2 rounds ago, we showed her Blitz video, which is the same content, only tightly edited down into 3.5, 4 minutes. And when we showed that, as soon as it ended, all these comments and questions came in like never before. And Patty was stunned. We were both stunned. Like, what the hell? And Matt, you there? You remember that, don't you? And there was just an influx of questions. Like before, like when Patty would give her 20-minute talk or whatever, she'd get some here and there, they kind of trickle in. But after this single 4-minute video, it was just an avalanche of questions hit. It was crazy. It really was a testament to the power of the tight editing of a video like that, hitting people's brains and lighting a fire for them to quickly, immediately have something to say or comment, things like that. That just doesn't happen when the person's giving their rambling little talk and talking off of slides. That sort. It just stunned us, and then we've had it with a couple of the other videos as well. And that's what's amazing.
I hope you have an intro. I hope you have an intro for Patty's talk that goes something like, "There once was a speaker named Patty."
She's got a ton of those, as you can imagine. She is constantly, precisely.
Hey, before we all go, I have a request for another session. I think we can vote, but I think everybody, even those aren't here, would agree with this. I think we need to have a session where we all share the tyranny of Randy Olson's editing methods.
Second.
That's the support group. Rick. That's the support group. We'll be meeting next week.
And am I to assume I'm not invited to that session?
Oh no.
Oh, you're definitely invited, Randy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any video of North Vietnamese self-criticism sessions, but I might be able to cut a good trailer for you.
Send somebody over to duct tape me to my chair with duct tape over my mouth and force me to watch with the Clockwork Orange toothpicks in my eyes.
There you go.
Get the whole critique. All
Did,
right, this
did
was an
anyone else
awesome
get
group. What's that?
Did anyone else get outtake reels? I got an outtake.
Oh, you did? Oh, man.
Explicit
Oh,
comments I
of your
shouldn't
talk.
have
Oh, yes.
made.
Yes, exactly. Wonderful. All right, 90 minutes is enough of this stuff. We're Rochelle, how about get in touch with me? Let's have a later on this week or something like that. Let's have a chat and talk about Forest Service. Give us some coaching on that.
I'd like that. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining in. And the whole thing is so much fun. And we're going to do it for Australia and New Zealand at the end of July. And then I think we might do it again in the fall, you know, and I think in the fall, people will be back at universities and we can really get even bigger audience. So it's just such a good event. It just brings so much energy together. So on that note, thanks to all of you. Jen, have yourself a wonderful weekend. And I will check back in with you about next week's episode. This is so much fun.
Looking forward to it, Randy. Thanks to everyone coming on. That was great fun.
You guys.
Bye-bye.